I've served as a park ranger on the Appalachian Trail for 2 years, and I thought I'd seen just about everything out here. Over the years, I've dealt with lost hikers, wild animal encounters, the occasional late-night camper who thinks they're sneaky, and even a few pranksters. But there's something about patrolling the trails at night that always keeps me on edge. It's not the usual animals or the rugged terrain. It's more about how the forest seems to come alive after dark. Some of my colleagues say the trail feels like a different world after sunset, and I'd never really understood what they meant until one strange, unforgettable night last fall. The Appalachian Trail can stretch for days without a glimpse of civilization, but there's a particular stretch near my regular patrol area where we enforce strict rules. No camping, no fires. That part of the trail sits close to a ravine, and over the years, we've seen enough accidents to keep the place off limits at night. If I caught someone in there, it was part of my job to send them on their way. But that night, it wasn't a stray camper that caught my attention. It was something that no training manual could have prepared me for. It was just after midnight, and I'd been out patrolling solo for a couple of hours. I was doing my rounds when I noticed a soft, flickering glow through the trees a bit farther off the main trail. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The light was faint, more like a shimmer, and the forest was dead quiet. Normally, you'd hear leaves rustling or some night creature rustling through the brush, but there was nothing. I kept walking, thinking maybe someone had broken the rules and set up a camp. It wasn't uncommon, especially with the kind of people who think they're above all the trail regulations. But as I got closer, I had a strange feeling about it. The light wasn't a typical campfire glow, nor did it look like someone's headlamp. It flickered and swayed like an old lantern. But who uses lanterns out here anymore? I stepped off the trail, keeping my flashlight pointed low to avoid giving myself away. The glow seemed to be moving deeper into the woods, like it was leading me somewhere, and I found myself following without really thinking it through. The beam would flash through the trees, just far enough that I could never quite make it out clearly, but each time I thought I'd lost it, it would flicker again, just a bit farther ahead. I'm a rational person, or at least, I like to think I am, but the whole situation made no sense. No one was supposed to be out here, especially not with an old lantern, and every logical part of me wanted to turn back. But there was something about that light, the way it just kept drawing me in. I told myself I'd just take a closer look, make sure no one was setting up a rogue campsite, and then head back to the main trail. Easy enough. As I got deeper, the air felt denser, heavier somehow. My breathing sounded too loud in the silence. It felt like I was being pulled along, and then suddenly, the light disappeared. I stopped right where I was, scanning the trees, wondering if maybe whoever it was had finally noticed me and turned their lantern off. But as I stood there listening, I noticed another strange thing. There wasn't a single sound around me. No insects, no breeze rustling the leaves, nothing. It was like the whole forest had gone silent. I kept walking, slower now, straining to see or hear any sign of life. Then, as suddenly as it had disappeared, the light flickered back on. Farther away this time, almost as if it was testing me, seeing if I'd keep following. I hesitated, but I'd already come this far. The ranger part of me, the one that always had to know the answers, won out over any lingering fear. I needed to see what was going on. The closer I got to the light, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. Branches seemed to stretch out of nowhere, brushing against me. The underbrush grew thicker, and I had to move carefully, stepping over roots and ducking under low-hanging limbs. Then, without warning, the light stopped moving. It hung there, suspended in the darkness, flickering faintly like an invitation. I stepped closer, trying to stay calm, but just as I got within a few yards of it, the light blinked out again, leaving me standing in pitch black. The sudden darkness made my heart jolt, and I quickly turned my flashlight on full beam, sweeping it through the trees, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever or whatever had been holding that lantern. Nothing. Just empty trees and shadows. I muttered to myself, trying to keep my cool. "All right, whoever you are, you got me." My voice sounded too loud in the stillness, but there was no reply. I figured I'd give it one last scan before heading back, so I took a few steps forward, turning in a slow circle as I swung the flashlight. But as I was about to head back, a faint glint caught my eye. I took a step closer and froze. In the beam of my flashlight, hanging from a low branch just a few feet away, was an old rusted lantern. It looked ancient, something out of another time, with glass panels covered in grime and a handle that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. There was no sign of the person who'd been carrying it, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest anyone had even been here. The lantern just hung there, swaying slightly as if caught in a gentle breeze. Only there was no wind. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that lantern hanging from the branch. My whole being was telling me to get out of there, but I couldn't bring myself to turn my back on it. My duty as a ranger held me there, rooted to the spot. I was terrified. Every shadow around me felt like it was closing in, but I couldn't ignore the safety risk. The thought of an unattended flame in the middle of these woods kept me from walking away. Reluctantly, I took a few steps closer and reached out to grab the handle. The lantern was heavier than I expected, cold and rusty to the touch. With one last look around, I twisted the knob to put out the flame, plunging everything into darkness. I quickly set it back on the branch, wiping my hands on my pants, and started backing away. As I made my way back to the main trail, every few steps I'd look over my shoulder, expecting to see that eerie light flicker back to life behind me. By the time I made it back to the main path, dawn was just starting to break. I don't think I've ever been so relieved to see the sun creeping up over the horizon. I didn't tell anyone about the light right away. I wasn't even sure what to say, and I figured no one would believe me. But the whole thing just gnawed at me. The next day, I went back out to that part of the trail, trying to find any evidence that someone had been camping or hiking out there. But there was nothing. No fire pit, no trash, no footprints. Just an empty stretch of forest that looked like it hadn't seen a person in years. I still work that same area, and I keep my night patrols, though I've never seen the lantern again. But every once in a while, when I'm out there alone in the dark, I'll catch a flash of light through the trees. Just a glimpse, a flicker, as if something's still out there, waiting for me to follow. And now, whenever I see a glint or a shimmer deep in the forest at night, I keep my distance. I tell myself it's just the reflection of my flashlight or maybe another ranger. After 25 years in firefighting, you'd think I'd seen it all. Accidents, rescues, some truly bizarre stuff. But nothing ever shook me, like what happened that morning on the Appalachian Trail. I was out early, right before dawn, aiming to get in a good hike and some fresh air. The mountain fog was thick that morning, rolling in so dense it almost had a weight to it, blanketing everything in sight. But fog was nothing new to me. I grew up with it on these trails, learning to navigate through the soupy, misty mornings. And at 45, having lived through more than a few close calls on the job, a quiet walk in the fog didn't feel like much of a risk. I'd parked at the trailhead just before 5 a.m., aiming to catch some of the sunrise if the fog lifted. The car headlights barely cut through the haze, and everything was muted, muffled. As I started up the trail, I could barely see a few steps ahead of me. Normally, the woods come alive in the early morning, birds chirping, branches creaking, squirrels scampering. But it was eerily silent. About half a mile in, the path opened up to a wider clearing, and that's when I saw a dark figure standing dead still in the middle of the trail. They were maybe 40 yards ahead, perfectly motionless. My first instinct was practical, probably another hiker who'd stopped to rest or maybe gotten turned around in the fog. So I kept walking, expecting the figure to move aside or wave. But they didn't. They just stood there. "Hey, morning," I called out, my voice echoing dully in the fog. No response. I stopped, squinting through the mist, trying to make out any details. They were too far to see clearly, just a silhouette, a tall, slim frame, head tilted slightly as if looking right at me. Something about it was off. They didn't shift or fidget, just held perfectly still. I hesitated, debating whether to get closer or turn back, but I brushed it off, assuming they were maybe lost in thought or, who knows, listening to something with headphones in. I took a couple more steps forward, then stopped again, watching. Still, nothing. "Everything okay up there?" I called out again, louder this time. Silence. The fog shifted a bit, thinning just enough that I got a better look. The figure wasn't facing me directly, but rather had its head turned slightly to the side, like they were listening, waiting. A slight prickle crawled up my spine, but I shook it off, telling myself it was just the strange lighting, the fog playing tricks on me. Another few steps forward, and then they vanished. Just like that. 1 second, they were there, solid as anything. The next, the fog rolled over and they were gone. Now, I've seen fog do funny things. It can distort, make shadows shift, even make it look like things are moving when they're not. But this was like nothing I'd ever experienced. I hurried up to the spot where I'd seen the figure, looking around for any sign of movement, of footsteps, maybe even a dropped item or something. Nothing, just fog and silence. Even the air felt different, like it was too still, too quiet. A little while later, I stopped to take a quick drink, and as I stood there, I heard a scream. High-pitched and absolutely chilling, it cut through the fog like a knife. It sounded close, maybe just 100 yards or so back along the path I'd come from. My instincts kicked in, that old firefighter training kicking back in hard. Someone could be in serious trouble. I turned and called out, "Hello? Where are you?" There was no answer, just silence. I waited, straining my ears, but the scream didn't come again. I didn't like the idea of ignoring what I'd heard, though. There was a chance it was an animal, a fox, or even a bird, but it had sounded human to me. Shaky, desperate. Against my better judgment, I left the trail and stepped into the woods, moving in the direction I thought the scream had come from. It was risky. Wandering off in this fog could mean getting lost, and I knew the dangers of that all too well. But that scream was etched into my mind, and I couldn't just walk away from it. As I pushed through the dense undergrowth, I kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. The fog made it feel like I was trapped in a maze. Every tree looked like the last, and soon enough, I'd lost sight of the trail entirely. That's when I heard a rustling up ahead. The sound grew closer. Branches snapped underfoot, like someone or something was moving toward me. But I couldn't see anything in the thick white blanket around me. I called out once more, "Is someone there?" Silence again, then another snap. I braced myself, trying to make sense of the sounds. The rustling grew louder, coming from different directions now, almost like there were several sets of footsteps moving around me, circling. I took a few steps back, searching for any sign of movement. And then, nothing. The sounds stopped. I stood there, heart hammering, waiting. "All right," I muttered to myself, "time to head back." I turned around, figuring I'd retrace my steps and find the trail, but that plan was easier said than done. The fog seemed thicker now, swallowing up the landscape around me, making it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. I started walking, trying to keep my movements steady, hoping I'd recognize something. A tree, a rock, anything to guide me back to the trail. Just as I started to get my bearings, there it was again. Another scream, piercing and desperate, echoing through the fog. It was closer this time, and my instincts flared up, urging me to move faster. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The scream had sounded the same as before, the exact same pitch and tone, like it had been played back on a recording. It didn't feel real. I pressed on, more cautiously this time, and then, through the mist, I spotted the figure. Standing just a few yards away, barely visible in the dense fog, it was the same as before, unmoving, its outline fuzzy and distorted, and once again, it stood there, completely still, facing me. My first thought was that it might actually be someone lost, someone in need of help. But as I squinted, trying to make out the details, a cold realization set in. There was no color, no features, just a faint, pale outline, almost like a shadow. I took a step back, and the figure seemed to dissolve once more, blending into the fog until it was gone. Every instinct in my body was telling me to get out of there, but I couldn't find the trail. I couldn't even tell which direction I'd come from. Finally, I managed to find a slight break in the trees that looked familiar. I followed it, hoping it would lead me back, and after a few minutes, I found the trail again. Relief washed over me, but I didn't feel safe just yet. As the sun was getting higher, the fog began to lift and the trail became clearer. I picked up my pace, eager to put some serious distance between me and whatever I'd just run into. I didn't stop walking until I was well past the section of trail where I'd seen the figure, back in the open air where the fog had started to thin out. I whipped around, scanning the empty trail, and there was nothing. No one. I wanted to believe it was just the wind, a trick of my tired mind. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled onto something beyond my understanding. I didn't let myself linger after that. The sound of my own footsteps was somehow comforting. I kept them steady, rhythmic, trying to shake the memory of that desperate scream and the figure that had stood watching me in the fog. Once the sun was high enough that the trail was fully visible, things felt almost normal again. The birds had started singing, the trees seemed to relax, and the eerie silence that had haunted me earlier had melted away. The fog thinned to patches until it finally disappeared altogether, leaving the forest clear and calm under the mid-morning light. But my nerves hadn't settled. Originally, I'd planned to make a full day of the hike, reaching a scenic overlook further up the trail, but that idea no longer seemed inviting. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, something that didn't want me there. So I cut the hike short, turning back far ahead of schedule and headed straight to my car. As I finally stepped out of the woods and into the open lot, I let out a long breath. I still hike now and then, but I haven't been back to that trail since, and whenever I think about it, I can still hear that scream echoing in my ears, that desperate, bone-chilling sound. I'm not sure what I saw, or if it was real or just some bizarre trick of the light, but either way, I'm not in a hurry to find out. I'd been organizing this Appalachian Trail hike for quite a few months. This trip was meant as my getaway after a long, exhausting school year. As a teacher, I get that precious summer break, and every year I try to do something different. This time, it was the trail. I wanted to lose myself in nature, maybe clear my mind before the chaos of the next school year hit. And hey, the chance to say I'd hiked part of the Appalachian Trail sounded pretty great. In the first few days, I was covering a few miles each day, pacing myself and enjoying every bit of the wilderness. Every now and then I'd come across another hiker, but mostly it was just me, my backpack, and the trail. At night, I'd set up my little tent, read a bit, and drift off under the stars. It was peaceful, almost like I was stepping back in time to a place where everything was simpler. On the third day, I came across a narrow, unmarked trail off to the side. It was tucked between two large trees, with branches arching overhead, almost like a doorway. I wouldn't have even noticed it if I hadn't stopped to adjust my pack. The trail didn't look like part of the main route, but I couldn't help myself. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured it was maybe a shortcut to a viewpoint or something worth checking out. I mean, I'd come all this way to explore, right? As I started down the side trail, the dense forest seemed to close in around me. It was quieter here, somehow. The canopy was thicker too, blocking out most of the sunlight, but I convinced myself it would open up soon, and that I'd get to a nice view, maybe even a clearing. A few minutes in, I started to realize the trail was getting narrower. The trees on either side felt like they were closing in. Bushes crowded the path, forcing me to duck and sidestep around branches. The packed dirt underfoot turned to patches of mud, with odd roots poking out like tripwires. About half an hour into the trail, I began to second-guess my decision. It didn't seem to be leading anywhere, just winding deeper into the woods, becoming less defined with every step. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it was undeniable. The trail was disappearing, almost like it was being swallowed up by the forest. It didn't even feel like a trail anymore, just a gap between trees. The unsettling part? I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me. Every time I stopped to listen, though, the sound stopped too. I thought it might be an echo of my own steps, but after a while it was clear that wasn't it. Someone or something was pacing me, and it seemed to know when I was listening. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but that only worked for so long. Eventually, I turned around, expecting to see a deer or some other animal lurking. But there was nothing, just trees and shadows. I took a deep breath and kept moving, forcing myself to focus on finding a way back to the main trail. I'd had enough of this little detour. After about an hour, it hit me that I was completely lost. I'd been trying to retrace my steps, but everything looked the same. Trees, bushes, shadows, no landmarks, no clear path. My phone had no service, and the GPS was as confused as I was. Every time I thought I was back on track, I'd come across the same fallen log or twisted tree, like I was going in circles. The footsteps started up again, and this time, they didn't stop. I could hear them clearly, crunching through leaves, snapping twigs. They'd get closer, then fade away, only to start up again a few minutes later. I shouted out a few times, hoping it was another hiker, but there was no response. Just that eerie silence, broken only by those steps. Panic started to set in. I was miles from the main trail, hours from anyone who might hear me if I called for help, and the daylight was fading. The last thing I wanted was to be stuck here overnight, especially with whatever was out there watching. I kept moving, though. I told myself I just had to keep going, that I'd eventually find my way back. But with every step, that hope faded. The footsteps continued, and I swore I could see movement in the trees, shadows darting between the trunks. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me, matching my pace. Just as the sun started to sink out of sight beyond the horizon, I stumbled into a small clearing. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. It was the first break in the forest I'd seen in hours. I dropped my pack and took a moment to catch my breath, hoping that maybe, just maybe, I'd find some landmark or clue to help me get back on track. That's when I saw a faint trail leading out of the clearing. It didn't look like much, but it was something. I grabbed my pack and started down it, my steps quick, my eyes darting around, expecting to see those shadows closing in. But then the trail vanished again, swallowed up by the forest. I stopped, trying to get my bearings, when I heard a low whisper, soft and almost melodic, drifting through the trees. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded inviting, like it wanted me to follow. I took a step forward, drawn to the sound. It led me deeper, winding through the trees, leading me farther from the main trail, farther from safety. And then it stopped. The silence was deafening. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no idea where I was, no idea how to get back. And now, with the sun gone and the forest cloaked in darkness, I was at the mercy of whatever was out there. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, listening to the silence. But eventually, I forced myself to move, to keep walking, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. The forest seemed alive, shadows shifting and twisting. I could feel it, something watching just beyond the edge of my vision. I stumbled, tripped, clawed my way through the darkness. Hours passed, I don't know exactly, I lost all sense of time. The forest seemed endless, stretching on forever like a labyrinth. And then, just as I was about to give up, I saw a faint glimmer of light, barely visible through the trees. I pushed forward, desperate for a way out. The light grew brighter, closer, until finally I broke through the trees and found myself back on the main trail. I don't know how I made it out, don't know what led me back. But as I stood there catching my breath, I knew one thing for sure. I would never, ever set foot on that trail again. The forest had shown me its true face, had let me glimpse the darkness that lay hidden beneath the trees. And I knew, deep down, that I was lucky to have escaped with my life. I can't shake the feeling that whatever's in those woods had let me go, almost as if it chose to. Since then, I've told anyone who asks about hiking the Appalachian Trail the same thing. Stick to the main trail. Don't wander down unmarked paths, and don't go looking for a better view. The forest there, it has a mind of its own. And trust me, it's best not to find out what happens when you go looking too deeply into it. The Appalachian Trail might be beautiful, but it hides secrets. After a long week of ER shifts, I was desperate for some fresh air. I'd taken on a last-minute overtime shift the night before, and my body was aching from the exhaustion. But the idea of being out in the open, surrounded by trees instead of fluorescent lights and monitors, sounded like exactly what I needed. I didn't plan for anything intense, just a short solo hike along one of the quieter parts of the Appalachian Trail in Maine. I packed a light bag, grabbed my water bottle, and set out early in the morning to beat any other hikers. This section of the trail was secluded, hardly touched by others, which was perfect for clearing my head. The first hour was peaceful, and I got lost in the beauty around me. The golden sunlight breaking through the tree canopy, the earthy smell of damp soil, the sounds of nature. It was exactly what I needed. I was well into the hike, maybe another hour past the trailhead, when I first noticed something off. Far off to my right, maybe 50 yards from the trail, stood a figure. At first, I didn't give it much thought, assuming it was another hiker who had gone off path for a bit of solitude. But something about their stance was unsettling. They were standing so still. I slowed my pace, squinting through the trees to get a better look. The figure seemed to be facing me, though it was hard to tell with the way the shadows played across their form. The sunlight filtered down through the trees, casting a strange, almost unnatural glow around them, making their skin appear ghostly pale. It was odd, and for some reason, I felt a prickling unease. "Hey!" I called out, hoping to shake off the discomfort creeping over me. "Are you okay?" No response. The figure remained motionless, staring in my direction. I couldn't even make out if it was a man or woman. They just seemed to be there, blending into the shadows, yet somehow standing out. I took a tentative step forward, hoping a bit of movement would encourage a reaction. But the figure didn't move an inch. I debated whether to get closer, but something deep down told me not to. Still, I took another step, peering through the trees for a clearer view, and then they turned. It wasn't a normal turn. It was too smooth, almost like they were sliding, drifting deeper into the woods without making a sound. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe they hadn't heard me, or maybe they were just enjoying their own solitude. But as I kept walking, the feeling lingered, that creeping sensation that something wasn't quite right. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was just worked up from the week I'd had. Another half hour passed, and I tried to settle back into my hike, focusing on the rhythm of my breathing. But that feeling never fully faded. I kept checking behind me, sure I'd see that figure lurking in the trees. And then I saw them again. This time they were much closer, maybe 30 yards away, standing off to my right. Same pale skin, same motionless stance facing me. I stopped dead in my tracks, a chill spreading through me. How had they gotten ahead of me without me noticing? "Hello?" I called, louder this time. "Is everything all right?" Nothing. Not a flinch, not a sound. They just stood there, watching. I could feel my pulse quicken as I watched them, waiting for some kind of reaction. I took a step back, my eyes never leaving the figure. And then, just like before, they turned, gliding away, deeper into the woods until they vanished from sight. It was almost as if they were leading me somewhere. I was officially unnerved now. There was something incredibly wrong with this person, and I didn't want to find out what it was. I turned back to the trail, picking up my pace, keeping an eye out for any familiar landmarks that would lead me back to the parking lot. I walked faster, telling myself I was overreacting, that it was just a strange hiker with a weird way of moving, or maybe even someone playing a prank. But deep down, I didn't believe that. There was something too unnatural about the way they appeared and disappeared, like they were part of the forest itself. The trail wound down into a hollow, and as I descended, the air grew cooler, the sunlight dimmer. I had to slow my pace as the path became steeper, but I kept checking behind me. When I reached the bottom, I paused, catching my breath and looking around. The trail was silent, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. But then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it again. Just a hint of pale skin peeking from behind a tree. I froze, staring at the spot, but there was nothing there, just shadows and trees. I forced myself to keep moving, quickening my pace, desperate to put some distance between me and whatever that was. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, I reached a familiar clearing. I was instantly relieved as I recognized the trail marker just ahead. I was close to the parking lot now, maybe 10 minutes away. I practically jogged the rest of the distance. But as I broke into the parking lot, I couldn't help looking back. There, standing just at the edge of the woods, was the figure. They were farther away now, almost swallowed by the shadows, but still watching me. As I hurried back to my car, fumbling with my keys, I looked over my shoulder one last time and saw the figure take a few steps toward me. It was just enough to send my heart racing even harder. My hands shook so badly that I struggled to get the key in the ignition, and the engine felt like it took ages to turn over. Finally, the engine started, and I sped out of there without looking back. Even now, lying in bed, I can't get that moment out of my head. The logical side of me tries to convince me it was just some lost hiker, but deep down, I know better. I haven't been back to that trail since, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever I saw wasn't supposed to be there. And it certainly didn't want me there either. If I'd hesitated a moment longer, if I hadn't managed to start the car, well, I don't want to think about it. One thing's for sure. Whatever was out there, it wasn't something I'd want to meet again. If these stories made you second guess your next hike, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life horror. Got your own unsettling outdoor experience? Drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear every spine-tingling detail. And remember, on trails like these, trust your instincts, because sometimes the wilderness watches back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.